Hello and welcome to NL's online guitar lesson series. Over the course of the next 6 weeks, we're going to learn lots of awesome stuff from the very beginning of the guitar. So you're going to learn how to hold the instrument, you're going to learn how to play the instrument, and you're going to learn, hopefully, how to think about the guitar moving forward. Before we get started playing the guitar, it's really important to get warmed up. We want to make sure that we have lots of blood moving through our shoulders, our arms, our hands, and our fingers especially. That will help to keep us nice and loose, it will help to make it easier to play, and it will help to prevent injury. So there's lots of movements we can do to make that happen, and here's a few of them now. We can start off just by shaking our arms. We can shake one arm at a time, or we can shake both arms. Feels a little bit silly just to do it on your own, but it doesn't really matter. Just to get your arms moving, to get blood moving through them. You can also roll your shoulders back and forward. A lot of people forget about the shoulders, but when we play guitar, our shoulders are moving into different positions, and you can get quite stiff if you're not nice and loosened off. The next thing to do would be to shake our wrists. Again, just to get the blood flowing through them, get used to moving through different ranges of motion in our wrists, and we can roll them around in circles as well, just to stretch off all the tendons and ligaments and muscles that control our hand. And we can also do the same thing with our fingers. We can wiggle our fingers to get them nice and warmed up, and we can stretch them in and out like this, just to make sure that we're nice and warm. We can even stretch our hands out like this, or if you feel like it, every individual finger as well, just to make sure that you're nice and loose. Even something as simple as rubbing your hands together can help to warm them up and get you ready to play. Just play around with all these movements, maybe make up some of your own, and try to build a little routine that works well for you. So most guitarists won't do a set routine before they play every time, but almost everybody will have a little bit of a shake off, will have a little bit of a loosen off, because it really does help. Now that we're nice and warmed up, let's get cracking on with the lesson. Hello and welcome to NL's online guitar lesson series. This is our 6th and final lesson, and today we're going to be talking about ear training and chord types. So we spoke briefly in a previous lesson about major and minor chords, and we talked about how they're written. So just to refresh your memory, a major chord is written just with the letter of the chord. So if it's a C major, then we just write a big capital C for C major. Minor chords are written with an uppercase letter and then a lowercase m afterwards, and that stands for minor. So a C minor would be uppercase C, lowercase m. C minor. But of course, I'm sure you have the question, what actually makes a chord major or minor, and what's the difference? It's really hard to get into this topic without going off into a bunch of different directions and exploring the real kind of meaty music theory behind it. So this is going to be a really simplified, shortened explanation. I'm sorry if I miss anything out, but I think we've covered the key points in this for this level that are important right now. The first thing you have to know about chords, at least theoretically, is that they are built generally on 3 notes. We can also call them triads because they have 3 notes. We have the first, the third, and the fifth. If you're wondering why they're called first, third, and fifth, and not first, second, third, then that's an excellent question, but it's out with the scope of this video, I'm afraid. For now, all we're worried about is the first, the third, and the fifth. Now, the first note determines what the chord is called. If I start on a C and I build my chord from there, then it's always going to be a C chord. The third note, that is the next note up, because we go first, third, fifth. The third determines whether the chord is major or minor. A major third sounds like this. You can see from our earlier lesson, this is a consonant interval. It sounds nice, it sounds kind of happy, harmonious. These 2 notes get along. If I play a minor third, that's not so consonant. I mean, it's not ugly, it's not grating, but in comparison to the major third, it sounds kind of dark, it sounds kind of brooding. And it transfers this feeling over to the whole chord. So if I play major third, minor third, you can really hear the difference. A little aside, and this is kind of out with the scope of this lesson right now, but it's useful to know that a minor third is just 1 fret lower than a major third. So if you can see here, I have a major third, I take this and move it down 1 fret, and I have a minor third. And that's one way to remember it as well. It sounds darker, it sounds lower and moodier, because it is. It's actually lower. The next note in our chord is the 5th. Now, the 5th is really important. We can't miss it out. It wouldn't be a triad if we didn't have 3 notes. For the most part, the 5th just kind of chills out and does what it does. 5ths can't be major or minor. In fact, we call them perfect because they kind of stay the same all the time. I mean, yes, you can move them about, but that's kind of advanced level stuff. So for now, the sound of a 5th, a perfect 5th, is this. And this is a very consonant sound. It's a very smooth sound. In fact, it's so smooth that some people feel that it doesn't even add much to our chord because it's not it doesn't add any color or flavor. It's so consistent with our root note. Nevertheless, we can't forget it. To build our triad, we need a 1, a 3, and a 5. So if we start on our 1, we add a minor third, and then we add our 5, we will have a minor chord. If we start at 1, we add a major third and a 5, we'll have a major chord. If I play these 2 chords once again, one after the other, you can really hear the difference between them. Now, on piano, this is clear as day because you can only play each note once on the piano. There is no repetition of notes. But on the guitar, it's not quite as simple because we have lots of repetition. I have a C here, and I have a C here. I have a different C here, and I have C's all over the place. And what that means is that I have lots of different places to play each note, and that means I can play lots of different chords in lots of different ways. So our chords won't always necessarily go in order, 1st, 3rd, 5th. That's what makes this really tricky. A chord on the guitar might go 5th, 1st, 3rd. It might go 3rd, 5th, 3rd. It might go 1st, 3rd, 5th. It just depends on the shape. Now, rather than trying to figure all these out, trying to build them up in the way that I just did, the way that most people learn chords and the way that I'd recommend to learn chords is just to learn the shapes, the things we've discussed in previous lessons. If you remember that this is an A minor shape, and this is an A major shape, then for now, that is all you need to know. Another thing worth mentioning on guitar is that because we have 6 strings, sometimes we can duplicate the notes of a chord within the chord itself. And that sounds kind of complicated. What do I mean? I mean that, for example, if I play this C major, I have 6 notes going there. So that means I have to double up on some of my notes. If I start from the very top, this is the 3rd, this is the 1st, this is the 3rd again, 5th, 1st, and 3rd. So even in this simple shape, we don't necessarily have all the notes in order. One last little thing to know is that in music, when the notes are out of order, that is, they don't go 1, 3, 5, we call that an inversion. It's more relevant to piano, because again, on piano, it's clear as day. When you have an inverted chord, you can kind of see it right out. On guitar, inverted chords are the norm. Most of the chords you'll play are inverted. It doesn't really matter, because we still call them by the same name. Even if they have the same notes in a different order, we use the same name. So this A minor is the same as this A minor, is the same as this A minor. All that matters is that we have the right notes in there somewhere. Now, as a little exercise, it can be really helpful just to switch between the major and minor versions of any given chord. And this can also just kind of be a window to the limit of your understanding. And what do I mean by that? I mean that some chords are very easy to play in a major tone, but very difficult to play in a minor tone. So that might not be possible for you yet. That's absolutely fine. But it's just a little window into the limit of what you're able to do for now. It's an avenue to explore later on. Some chords, like D for example, D major and D minor, are really easy to change back and forth. Same for E. So this is E minor and E major. I just have to change one finger. So have a little explore and see which chords you're able to make major and minor. Now, most chord progressions, like the sequences of chord that we spoke about in some previous lessons, most chord progressions use major and minor chords. So it's this combination of happiness and sadness, shadow and light. It's just like in a painting, you know, you need the juxtaposition between the two to create this kind of emotional drive in the music. If you just play major chords all the time, it's going to sound kind of sickly sweet. If you just play minor chords all the time, it can get kind of dull. So you want this combination. It's the happiness turning into sadness and then becoming happiness again that really kind of gives chords their power when you use them properly. So I'm aware that this is lots of information to absorb, but we've got one more concept to tackle in today's lesson, and that is chord extensions. What are extensions? Extensions are just additional notes. So I said that most chords are triads. They have 3 notes. They have the first, the third, and they have the fifth. Well, if we keep going, we can add on, for example, a 7th. Now, what would that sound like? It depends on what we add, because a 7th can be major or minor, just like a third. A minor 7th sounds like this. A major 7th sounds like this. So unlike with the third, it's not so clear-cut between happy and sad. You know, I wouldn't say necessarily that the minor 7th is a sad sound and the major 7th is a happy sound. In fact, the major 7th kind of rubs a little bit more. It's a little bit more grating, isn't it? But it's important to know that that's what these intervals are called. That's what these 2 notes are called when we put them together. So if this is the root, then this is the major 7th. If we add the 7th into some chords, we can kind of hear the difference that it creates. It adds a bit more color and a bit more flavor to whatever chord we're playing, and that is how musicians use these extensions. If we're playing on piano, we would just have our chords out like this, and we would just add notes in. We would literally just play an extra note, and that would be our extension, that would be our extra flavor. On guitar, it's not as obvious. We have to kind of move our fingers around to change certain notes. Maybe it changes from the 5th into the 7th, and that's how it creates more flavor. So, for example, in an A minor chord, if I take this finger off, my ring finger, and I make that an open string, that becomes an A minor 7. If the A is my root, then this note is my minor 7. And together with the third and the fifth, they sound like this. So that is a minor 7 chord. If I play a minor chord, but I put in a major 7, it sounds like this. Now that is a very spicy sound. That's how I would describe it. It's kind of rubbing, it's kind of grating. That doesn't mean that it's not a good chord. There are plenty of really good uses for this chord, but it does mean that it can be a little bit more difficult to use it in a way that sounds good or in a way that doesn't sound kind of grating and irritating. Often these really tense, harsh chords can lead into other chords, and that sense of resolution is what will give a progression a really nice power. But for now, it's just important to know the sound of that chord, and we call it a minor major 7th. When we have a minor third and a major 7th, it's a minor major 7th. So when we have a major third and a minor 7th, we call this a dominant 7th chord. Now it's a little bit confusing, like it doesn't seem consistent. It's kind of an arbitrary name. There's a really good reason why it's called that, but it's out with the scope of this video. So for now, we're just going to call it a dominant 7th chord, and we build it up just like we built up the other chords. We have a root note, we have a major third, we have a perfect 5th, and now we have a minor 7th, or in this case, we could call it a dominant 7th. If we do that, it sounds like this. So this is an A dominant 7th. If I go between A and A dominant 7th, hopefully you can hear the extra flavor, the extra character, the extra color that that note provides. I always think that dominant 7th chords sound kind of bluesy. They sound a little bit mysterious. They sound kind of fun. And it's a really good thing to have in your vocabulary. These are really common 7th chords. Like most 7th chords you'll see will be dominant 7ths. And so if we refer to them, sometimes we'll just call it 7. So sometimes we would just call this an A7. And when it's written down, that's how it's written down. Just A and the number 7. What that means is an A major chord, but we add our minor 7th or dominant 7th. The last kind of 7th chord that we're going to discuss today is just a straight up minor 7th. And that's what happens when you have a root note, a minor third, a perfect 5th, and a minor 7th. So both of these are going to be minor. And that gives it a kind of dark minor sound. If I play an A minor 7 compared to an A minor and minor 7, minor, minor 7, you can hear it kind of sounds a little bit darker, a little bit more brooding. So just be familiar with that sound. Try and experiment. If you see some different minor 7th shapes, play a few of them and get used to hearing that sound, to hearing that flavor. Because when you're used to hearing that flavor, when you know what it sounds like, or to continue the metaphor, when you know what it tastes like, then you know when to add it. And that's really important when you're constructing chord progressions or when you're just changing them from what you have written down. Now, as I said, I know that's an awful lot to keep track of. There's some kind of higher level stuff there in terms of music theory. Even though we've only just touched on it, I get how that can kind of just open more questions than it answers. Hopefully, you've got a decent overview of how chords are built, why they're called what they are, how they're written down, and even some more complicated things like seventh chords. So I hope that's all made sense, and I hope you've enjoyed today's lesson. Well, thanks very much for tuning into today's lesson. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you learned an awful lot. Just as we finish our lesson today, we're going to round it off the same way as we started, with some stretches and some cool down movements. This is again just to make sure that we stay nice and loose now that we're finished, that we don't cramp up or get sore, and that means that we can play even better tomorrow. Okay, so a lot of the same movements we did at the start, we can do now. We can roll our shoulders, we can shake off our arms, we can roll our wrists, and we can stretch off our fingers. Just like at the beginning, the key thing is to keep things moving, to keep things warm and stretched off. With all that done, all that's left is to say thank you very much for joining us today at NL Guitar Lessons Online. Please check out some of our other content, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe.